Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to episode 490. On today's show, Phil experienced a Twitter typhoon when he suggested last week that love your country is not actually a biblical command. We break down the reactions to his tweet and why we mix patriotism with our faith so easily. Then I talked to Christine Caine, the founder of A21, and an Australian from a Pentecostal background about her experience of American evangelicalism and what we can learn from a broader exposure to Christians from around the world. All of that, plus some animal news and a television you can taste from Japan. Here is episode 490.
Hey there, welcome back to the Holy Post Podcast. I'm Phil Vischer. I am here with three delightful people. Yes, count them, three. I've got Sky Jitani coming from...
Hi, Phil.
Hi, Sky, coming from the Death Star, his new office.
This looks nothing like the Death Star.
The Death Star with the shiny Rembrandt. And we've got Christian Taylor. Hi, Christian.
Hey, Phil. How are you?
Good. Who's coming from a cheery light blue-green room.
This is my
somewhere.
new Normandy room.
Oh, the Normandy room?
Yeah.
I didn't know what that means.
As well.
Is it supposed to look like Normandy? Is that the color of Normandy?
It is. It is.
Oh.
You'll have to come by sometime.
Okay.
Is it kind of seafoamy? Like seafoam green?
Yeah.
Okay. There you go.
Okay. And Jason Ruggs here. Hi, Jason. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I've been sick forever. So I'm not great, but that's okay. We will carry on regardless. Here's the theme song. What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Sky and Phil and the Holy Post. Sky and Phil and the Holy Post. And sometimes Christian. So Christian, it's been like 3 weeks since you've been on the show. Where have you been in that 3 weeks?
Well, I was here in Wheaton for most of it and living through a whole house renovation, which has not been very much fun. And then I went to Normandy for a week. That was quite an interesting experience, flying over there and everything that we had to do to get there. And our plane got canceled right before we got on it. And then I got COVID for Christmas. So that was fun. And then I came home.
That sounds like a new hit Christmas song. COVID for Christmas. Got COVID for Christmas. Okay. And but you're back. Why you finished the Normandy movie. So why were you back in Normandy again?
Well, two reasons. One, they've basically become our family, Flo Boucherie and her family. So we see them often. They come here and visit. And but I'm also starting to work on another film called Carentan, Unlocking the Road to Liberty. And it's about the Battle of Carentan in Carentan, France.
Oh. I thought you were doing a thing about the Dutch.
Brave Dutch. You've forgotten about the Dutch.
No, I haven't forgotten about the Dutch, but I have to, projects in development. We got to wait to see what money comes in when to do what. But we did launch Documentary First, our new company. That was exciting.
Congratulations. Documentary First Inc., Documentary First LLC. What is it?
Yeah, well, Documentary First Productions in my mind. I don't know.
LLC? Oh, it doesn't.
No, we just reformed.
It's not an entity?
Not yet. No, it's really just doing business as. We've got to find an umbrella to put all these fun projects in. So
Right. Or a bucket or an umbrella.
Bucket would probably be more useful.
You put them under an umbrella, you put them in a bucket. Okay. And Sky, you had some fun over the last week, interacting a little bit on Twitter, not a whole lot, but a little bit, just enough to give you something to talk about with David French on Friday.
Yeah, I try to just throw out some stuff and then back away because otherwise people, it's an endless black hole of discussion and often nonsense.
Yeah. We'll talk about that in just a bit. But first, this is much more important news. Squirrel from hell injures 18 during 48-hour biting spree in the UK.
Wow.
This sounds like a Monty Python thing. Remember the rabbit?
The rabbit of whatever it was. A psycho squirrel's 48-hour Christmas rampage terrorizes town, injures 18. Now, we have to figure out when we're done talking about this story what the theological implications are of this, because I'm not real clear. what the theology is and what it means. Is it an end times thing? Is it creation is revolting? Are these the groans of creation waiting to be redeemed? UK residents were left reeling after a crazed grey squirrel went on a wild Christmas rampage in Buckley, Wales, injuring a staggering 18 people in 2 days. Facebook posts alerted people, warning, vicious squirrel that attacks. Along with grainy photos of the furry culprit on a fence post. Has bitten me, attacked my friends, bit my dog.
How do they know it's the same squirrel?
Because of what it was wearing. It was wearing a dark gray hoodie. I don't know.
Always the hoodies.
Yeah, I know. You got to watch out for the hoodies. The nutty critter, which has since been dubbed Stripe after the evil character from Gremlins, that makes sense, reportedly did not discriminate in its attacks, lashing out at the elderly, children, and pets alike and biting them everywhere from head to legs. Nowhere was safe. The critter would launch at people in the gardens and even chase them down the road. What do you do when
if you're being chased by a squirrel, you've got some insecurity issues. Can't you just kick it?
No, it jumps. They jump. They
don't
on
jump
your
that
face.
much.
It'll
They
jump
don't
on
jump
your
that-
face like the rabbit of the cave in the Monty Python. It'll jump on your face and chew you to death.
Yeah, you just need to get a holy hand grenade of Antioch.
Yes, many victims had to receive tetanus shots after getting savaged. After arriving at the hospital, I had to have a tetanus jab because the squirrel broke my skin, said technician Scott Felton, who was ambushed by the psychotic tree hopper while smoking on his patio. See, maybe it's a health squirrel. It's like, stop smoking! I'll kill you! Stop smoking! Maybe it was running
the
around.
squirrel's an activist. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. During the course of a 2-day biting spree, the bloodthirsty squirrel reportedly injured 18 people with a staggering 21 attacks over 48 hours, starting on December 23rd.
It sounds like a really, really low budget horror film.
Now, I didn't know this. Well, they caught the squirrel. Gray squirrels are not indigenous to the UK. They were brought from North America in the 1870s to enhance the aesthetics of upper crust estates. I say, why don't we have any of those charming little rodents? Go to America and bring me back some. We will let them loose.
So
And
these
I'm
are
sure
Yankee.
nothing bad will happen in 150 years.
These are Yankee squirrels that are fighting the monarchy.
It's like, take that, you upper crust Brits. Yeah, so that squirrel was euthanized because if you catch one, it's illegal to release it in the wild since it's an invasive species. So
At what point?
Wow.
At what point is a species not invasive anymore if it's been there for 150 years?
it's not indigenous, Sky, so it's forever. I mean, pythons will always be an invasive species in the Everglades, no matter how long they're there. They're not supposed to be there.
Well, you could argue that's true of most people are probably not supposed to be in England. They came at some point, right?
Yeah. When we talk about invasive species, we give ourselves a pass.
Right, humans don't count.
We do not count as invasive. Okay. If you think that was a fun story, this one was even better. I need to start the year with something ridiculous because I don't know. I just need to. Japanese professor invents lickable television.
That was from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Really? Could they lick the TV? Oh, yeah. What did they do in the movie? I don't remember what it was.
Well, I think maybe I'm combining Veruca Salt's lickable wallpaper and when
maybe that's it.
Mike jumped into the TV. Mike TV went into the TV. I'm getting them confused.
Yes. Right.
Was someone asking for lickable TV?
A Japanese professor has created a prototype TV screen that enables viewers to not just see and hear content, but taste it too. It's called, hang on guys, it's called Taste the TV. Viewers can now enjoy a new sensory edition thanks to a 10-flavor carousel that, when combined, can imitate specific foods' flavors from chocolate to pizza. Once mixed, the flavor combination rolls over the TV screen via hygienic film for consumers' licking pleasure.
Oh my gosh.
No, thank you.
Says the professor, they have pictures of a poor Japanese female student who was demonstrating, and she's just got her nose right up against a screen licking.
So there's a film that goes over the screen, which carries the flavor on it.
Flavors, yeah.
And does this film kind of scroll across so it changes based on what's on the screen?
I don't know. I don't. It's such a bad idea that I don't even want to have to dive into it enough to figure out how it could possibly not be a bad idea. Says the professor, the goal is to make it possible for people to have the experience of something like eating at a restaurant on the other side of the world, even while staying at home. So you could watch a cooking show, and then you could say, well, let me taste that. That looks good. And then lick your TV.
But there's a totally different experience from, say, eating a piece of cheesecake than licking a screen that may or may not have cheese.
It is exactly the same.
And then I don't. Ew! Like, what if you don't know who else has licked that screen? Is this the right invention to have in a pandemic?
Absolutely, because we're all homebound and we can't go to the restaurants we want to on the other side of the world. So we want them to be. It's an inkjet printer of taste to squirt. Now, I guess the real question is, why does it need to be on the screen?
Yeah.
Why couldn't the inkjet printer just print out a little piece of paper with the taste on it? Like that, because there's edible inkjet printing. You know, some of the really experimental restaurants are using, like, and you can print images for the tops of birthday cakes that are also edible. They print them on an edible substrate of some sort. So we could do that. We could say, here's a flavor that we've printed on this little edible sheet. Now eat it and taste it. Why do we need to lick the TV?
This could be the solution to digital church with digital communion, where it just prints out, a little wafer and a little grape juice flavored.
Yeah, and the great thing with most of the wafers is you don't actually have to print out a flavor because they just taste about the same as licking a TV.
Right, but you could get that printable paper that dissolves on your tongue.
Yeah,
and in it goes, and there you go. Church is done.
Yeah, and you could make maybe a little pocket-sized printer, so you could just take communion wherever you are during the day while you're traveling. Just pull out your pocket-sized printer and print up a communion. Or you could actually just put a cracker and a small thing of juice in your pocket and maybe accomplish the same thing. I'm going to go out on a limb. Christian, what do you got? What do you think?
I'm sitting here trying to figure out how to change the subject, because this is just disintegrated into complete silliness.
Sometimes we need a little silly. We
It's
need
so
a
true,
little
Phil.
silly right this very minute.
Okay, so this Japanese guy invents it, but is there anyone who wants to actually market this product? Is it going to go anywhere?
I think cooler heads are prevailing. This is only the latest flavor-based creation from this professor and his approximately 30-person student team. Previous taste-focused developments have included a fork that makes food taste richer.
What?
Interesting.
Enrichening fork, a fork of enrichment. His new lickable screen is a one-off that he's personally built over the last year. Should he scale it commercially, he estimates each unit would cost about $875.
Yeah,
Plus,
worth
they have to
every
ship
penny.
to your home all of the different flavors to load into your flavor carousel. Why not just squirt it into your mouth? I'm going to just go squirt it in my mouth. Don't squirt it on my TV. Because my mom told me, don't watch TV that close. Don't get that close to the TV. If you're close, and I'm just going to go out on a limb and say this as a principle. If you're close enough to your TV that you could lick it, you're too close to your TV. Move back.
Remember Smell-O-Vision?
Yeah.
That seems
my TV farted.
Somewhat more realistic.
Yeah, but I still don't want it.
I know, nobody wants it.
Just because I can see it doesn't mean I want to smell it.
For sure.
Right.
For sure.
That's kind of a motto of this show.
Jay.
This is kind of reminding me of Soren in Disney World. Like, how it would come out. Smells like you go over the orange grove and you get the orange flavor and everything. It's like, I think that's about as extreme as I'd want to go with any technology like this.
They're very judicious with what they choose to let you smell when you're soaring over California. Many things you could soar over that you don't want to smell.
Have you been to the new version where you're soaring over the world?
Not yet.
Yeah.
No, what happens?
Well, you go over the world. You go to different places, not just California.
You smell the whole world.
Yeah. Like in France, you smell cigarettes and armpits.
Shame on you, Sky Jitani.
Yeah. Speaking of insulting our listeners, last week we mentioned the ERLC, the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention, as an instance of the empire striking back and a pull back towards the right after the departure of Russell Moore. One of our friends, Dan Darling, took us to task on Twitter and said that was a cheap shot, and the people at the ERLC are doing good work. And I do believe that is true. I do believe the people at the ERLC are doing good work. I was going off. This is my disclaimer. I meant no disparagement to the individuals working at the ERLC. I was going off the end of year communication. I've now gotten 5 emails from the ERLC, and one of them summarized the year's work, which was pro-life causes and religious liberty. And 4 of them are raising money to buy ultrasound machines to put in crisis pregnancy centers, which is a valid thing. And a good thing, but those are the only communications I've gotten. So it does appear like the end of the year communication is completely devoid of the hot topics that got Russell Moore put on a list of people that needed to be driven out of the SBC. That's all I got to say about that.
You were making an observation.
I was making an observation.
Yeah.
I meant no... I was not trying to disparage any individuals, except that when you had a year where people within the SBC were calling for the ERLC to be shut down, to be defund the ERLC, it was over the very topics that at the end of the year are no longer being mentioned. So I'm just connecting the dots. Maybe falsely.
But the fact that those topics are not being mentioned in their email communications doesn't necessarily mean there isn't any work going on with those topics. They're just not being put to the front and spotlighted.
They may still be doing work on sex abuse within the SBC. They may still be doing work on racial justice. I don't know, but they're not talking about it at the end of the year. That was my only comment. Okay. Thank you. But Dan, I accept your correction. Sky, any more response to you and David French? We're talking about Kevin DeYoung and the complaint from Kevin DeYoung that people like David French, and we'll assume he also met Sky Jitani, but not Phil, because Phil is fun and silly and never makes anyone mad. People like David French and Sky Jitani are critiquing the white evangelical world from the outside, where that should be done by pastors on the inside.
There were some people who left comments on our Holy Post page.
Yeah, can I read one?
Sure. I don't know what you're reading because I haven't looked at them in a couple of days, so we'll find out.
Who did Kevin DeYoung have in mind when he wrote that article? Come on, Sky. 95% of the Holy Post content amounts to, quote, white evangelicals are stupid, sexist, racist, and power hungry, unquote. Parenthetical, which is true sometimes. You clearly...
The other 5% is butt news.
You clearly, even more than French, I'd say, match the description. You should invite DeYoung to the show, and maybe he can explain himself more. Okay. Respond.
Yeah, we get a lot of those, not just about DeYoung, but all kinds of topics where people want us to invite so-and-so, fill in the blank, to the show. Neil Chevney or Shenvi, sorry. Kevin DeYoung or whatever. They always
Thomas
want
Sowell, Candace Owens, Larry Elder, Donald Trump.
Answers in Genesis people, whatever. Like, they always want their advocate for their point of view to be on our show. And I don't know why we've given the impression that that's what this show's about. Because I don't think it is it? We don't have debates on the show.
This show is about our point of view, not anyone else's.
And it isn't like there aren't 3,000 other podcasts out there that are dealing with these same topics on a weekly basis that people could listen to their heart's content. So
but what do you say? What do you say, Sky, to the criticism? 95% of the content amounts to white evangelicals are stupid, sexist, racist, and power hungry.
Oh, I think that's obviously an exaggeration.
85 tops.
85 tops. No, I think part of it is we tend to have most of our existence within the historically white evangelical American church context. And so being within that, having been a pastor within that, you being a lifelong multiple generation Christian in that, Christian being from Mississippi and an SBC growing up a tender, conservative white Republican, your dad was in the Reagan administration. Like that is the world in which many of us have existed. And I think a lot of our audience existed. And so if we are critiquing that world, we are critiquing it primarily as insiders rather than outsiders. It would be weird if we spent the majority of our time critiquing historically Black Protestantism, which isn't a tradition any one of us has been a part of in any meaningful way. Or if we were outside critiquing, liberal mainline Protestantism or something. It's just not the tradition we've been a part of. So I think that's a big, big piece of this. As far as, is it all sexist, racist? So, no, clearly not, because you have many of the people on our show have come from white evangelicalism, and they themselves are critiquing it. And they clearly are not racist, sexist. I mean, we mentioned in that episode, Beth Allison Barr and Kristen Dumais, both white, both from evangelical backgrounds or teaching at evangelical schools. And they're not, as far as I can tell, racist or sexist, given what they're writing. So,
but aren't they trying to destroy evangelicalism?
I don't think at all. I think evangelicalism in its best moments has always been a reformed movement. I mean, a reformed lowercase r, meaning it's reforming itself. It's self-critiquing. That's one of the characteristics of evangelicalism. One of the quadrilateral components is transformation, right? It is self-improvement, is self-transformation, not self-transformation,
activism.
But the transformation of the self into the conforming to the character of God, the cruciformity of it all. So part of what we're called to as evangelicals is to admit wrongdoing, look at the log in our own eye, and be corrected. That's what spiritual formation, a lot of it is. And so to not do that work would be pastoral malpractice. And we critique some of the nuttiness going on in American evangelicalism, because there's a lot of nuttiness going on in American evangelicalism. And if we were part of a different tradition, we'd be pointing out the nuttiness in that tradition. But I don't think people enjoy that so much.
Sorry, Sky.
No, go ahead.
Well, we've been around now doing this for about 10 years. And that was, if not a little bit longer, and that was long before Donald Trump. And, I've kind of always felt like we were talking to our own team, from the very beginning about what it really looked like to live out our faith in, the public square. And does it look, different, than sometimes we think it should. And so it's always sort of this clarion call, I think, to our own team about rising up and trying to live more like Christ, not just in what we say, but also in what we do and how we interact with the other. And I think we've always done that. I think it's gotten a lot more exacerbated in the last 5 years because I think our team changed clothes in some senses. That really, we weren't recognizing our people anymore. And I think it's been a confusing time. And I think it is important that we stand up to the people in our team and say, hey, is this who we want to be? And I think without voices like yours or without David French, or there's so many others, Russell Moore, Beth Moore, I think it is difficult for us to look at our own stuff and what we need to changed. I think we just need to make sure we are humble about it. And David said that in his interview with you on Friday. He also said it in the article that he wrote on Sunday. I need to be reflective and think about what people, how they're receiving what I'm saying, and make sure that I'm doing it in a loving way. And I think that's true for us too. We need to be careful with the tone we strike, when we're sort of calling people to live on a higher plane.
That's a good point. And, when you read the New Testament, especially the epistles of Paul, he doesn't spend much time at all critiquing people outside the church. He is spending his energy pastorally trying to help those within the church live more faithfully, and at times calling them out for their bad faith or their hypocrisy or their sin. And nobody, I think, would accuse Paul of not spending enough time criticizing the culture, because that wasn't his goal. His goal was to make the body of Christ, the churches that he was responsible for, reach full maturity. And so we spend time poking fun at things in the culture as well. But if we didn't spend energy trying to refine the church itself and be more faithful to Christ, then I don't know what we'd be doing other than just making everyone feel better by poking fun at those outside the church.
Yeah. Is there a point to, we need to be putting on more stories about the good things that white evangelicals are doing?
Yes and no. When I look at the people we interview, in my mind, most of that is the great stuff that evangelicals are doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're brilliant people.
If we interview the president of World Relief or the president of Compassion International or World Vision, we're actually talking about the good things that evangelicals are doing.
Yeah. Just earlier today, I did an interview with Matthew Milliner, who will be coming up in a future episode of the podcast. He's an art historian at Wheaton College, and he's written this really intriguing book about G.K. Chesterton and Native Americans and how to think about Native American culture and the Christian influence. And it's a bizarre mix of things, but you look at somebody like Matthew Milliner and I'm deeply impressed at his scholarship and the way he's helping me think deeply and in a Christian way about Native American history. And I'm like, this is a great aspect of white evangelicalism that's doing something remarkable. Like those kinds of people and stories make up half of our podcasts. And that's what we're elevating, is the voices that don't get heard in a lot of other places, who have really important and wonderful insights for us to grow in our faith. That's what we try to do. So yeah, we do highlight stories of nuttiness and hypocrisy at times, but then we try to hold up the best thinkers and minds and voices that are out there.
Okay. Christian, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I mean, one thing I have liked about working with you guys is that when people have challenged you on things, you have been thoughtful as well about how you've come across, and you've made public apologies here. I've heard you when you feel like you've stepped over the line or you weren't being considerate. And I do think that that balance of calling things as we see them, biblically speaking, and doing it with love, and also being humble enough to apologize if we don't do it well. I think that's what we need to be focused on. And hopefully we're continuing to do that here.
It's funny because people will often say, make sure you're not in just a bubble, just an echo chamber of voices you agree with. So follow people that you disagree with. So I do that. I follow people that I disagree with. And then they say things, on Twitter that I disagree with. So I say something. And maybe that's where it goes wrong, because then things get messy. So here's what happened this last week. I follow someone that I disagree with. Not all the time, but quite often, just to see what they're saying. And they threw out a hypothetical question last week on Twitter. Maybe it wasn't hypothetical. I don't know. They threw out the questions. If Christians are comfortable with their pastors exhorting them to love our neighbors, why are they uncomfortable with our pastors exhorting them to love our nation? And it seemed like a question that was asking for an answer. So I piped up. It's like,
Twitter, we have a Twitter virgin among us, apparently.
It seems like they want this question to be answered. So I said, well, love of nation, often leads to nationalism and patriotism at a level which can cause harm. And that's probably why love of nation is not a biblical imperative. And that's all I said. And then someone retweeted just that without the question I was responding to. And a whole bunch of people decided that I was saying that it was sinful to love America, that loving America was sinful and was unbiblical. And so they started jumping on my head. like people all over the place, and were retweeting it and jumping on my head. And then it ended up with a Southern Baptist ethicist jumping in and showing my tweet as an example of someone who has not done any extensive reading on the theology of politics. And I was held up as an example for lampoonery. I was like, what just happened?
And didn't somebody say something like stick to vegetables or cucumbers or something?
That always happens. Yeah, just stick to the talking vegetables, you buffoon. Like, oh man, he asked a question. I just tried to answer. And I just, it's hard to let it go once people are saying you're an idiot because you think the Bible says we can't be patriotic. I was like, well, that's not even what I said. I'm saying that there's no biblical imperative to love your country. There is a biblical imperative to love your countrymen, to love people. And it was an interesting conversation. So, stupid me, I kept it going because well, that's an interesting point. Here, let me respond to that point. Oh, you have an interesting point too. Here, let me respond to you. And suddenly it's like you're in a food court and you're the only one with food and everyone is just whacking you with their trays trying to take your food and you're covered with bruises. I came out covered with bruises.
It sounds like the way that you described Facebook when you started trying to talk to people on Facebook.
I know. I don't know. Maybe Twitter is going the way of Facebook, and I can't do that anymore either. I just felt it took like 2 days before it died down. 2 days.
Well, what'd you learn, Phil?
Sky. Well, beware responding to vague hypotheticals. Because the real first response should have been, what do you mean by love our nation?
That's a good, asking a question would have been a good, wise choice, Phil.
Yes, good first response. Like, do you mean care for it and the people that live there? Do you mean want to see the people that live there flourish in a biblical sense? Well, then yes. But does it mean I will put my nation first before other nations, to the harm of other nations, to the detriment of other nations? Well, I'm not sure that's biblical. So there was actually a whole lot of conversation about how do we order our loves?
Yeah.
And are we called to order the love for neighbor, meaning and his nationality, nation of residence, a category of neighbor? Because as I pointed out, I'm closer to many Canadians than I am to many Americans. So does that mean
geographically?
Geographically, does that mean I need to love Canada because I'm closer to so many Canadians?
Right.
Sky, you're really not helping me at all with this.
Well,
you're just sitting back and laughing at me.
It is kind of entertaining, I'll admit. And I did see some of the exchange on Twitter and did not say anything. I was just
You're gonna leave him and let him dangle out there by himself, right?
I'm just getting whacked in the food court of ideas, and you just get on the elevator and go up to the Disney store.
Wrong metaphor. I saw you more like flailing in the water, and I'm just watching from the shore, from the pool deck, wondering, is he really going to go under here, or is he just going to learn how to swim? And so,
so you're one of those tough love dads. I like that. I like that. Yeah.
Okay,
are they pretending they're drowning, or are they actually drowning? Come on, kids. Let's watch your brother and see what happens next.
Right. It's very entertaining. Okay, but here's something that didn't come up as far as I could tell. I didn't see every response, but one of the things that I think needs to be taken into consideration here is context.
Yes.
So the original question was like, why do people not like it when their pastors say love your country, but they're okay with love your neighbor? And I agreed with your response, but you also have to look at the moment in which this is being spoken, and it matters. So this is probably a bad analogy. Some people are out there saying all lives matter, right? All lives matter. It's true. All lives do matter. And amen. We can all affirm that. But when you say all lives matter, the day after George Floyd gets murdered and there are protests in the streets that are holding up Black Lives Matter signs, when you say all lives matter at that moment, you're not really saying all lives matter. What you're also saying is you shouldn't be protesting police violence against unarmed Black people. And that's a very different message where the context is different. And same thing with love your country. I can make a theological argument how loving your country is an extension of loving your neighbors. But in this moment in American history, where love your country is being spoken from a certain political angle with a certain political agenda, what it's really communicating is stop criticizing the myth of America that I prefer. And that's what people are reacting to when a pastor says, love your country in 2022 America at this moment. So you can't just make a statement and go, well, what's wrong with this? You have to look at the statement in its historic and cultural moment and ask what freight is it carrying along with it that people are reacting to that you can't be naive about. And that's where I felt like his original tweet was really disingenuous, because he wasn't just saying, what's the difference between loving your neighbor and loving your country? In 2022, when that's become a mantra, America first and make America great again, all that kind of stuff is bundled together with a certain political agenda. Yeah, people are going to react to that differently. And that was just glossed over or completely ignored in the Twitter exchanges.
Well, I mean, it sounds like it was a very baiting Twitter. I didn't see it, but I mean, was it a baiting type question? Is that what he was inviting?
I guess. I don't know.
So you took the bait, Phil. That's the deal.
Baited.
You took the bait. Yeah, I mean, I think please correct me if I'm wrong. Is there anything in the Bible where God talks about we have to love our country? No, never.
A few people tried to pull something out of, I forget where.
You also have to remember the whole concept of a nation state, or a state in particular, didn't exist 2,000 years ago.
I pointed that out. A nation state is a modern construct.
Yes.
Paul was not contemplating nation states when he talked about his love for his Jewish brothers and his Jewish countrymen. He talks about,
and the word nation. The word nation in the Greek New Testament is ethnos, which is it's an ethnic group, is a nation. It's not a country.
Right.
So that's why we talk about a state is different than a nation.
Biblically speaking, America is not a nation.
No, it's a state.
Can I say that? That's provocative. Ooh,
not even biblically speaking, just in the dictionary. Just by the English definition of those words, America is not a nation. It is a state.
Yeah. My nation is Sweden. I'm Swedish.
There you go.
That's my people group. So I did say, Saul, should I love Swedes more than other people since they're my people group? I just don't. Just love people. If you love your neighbors, everything else will take care of itself. If you live in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, you're going to be a whole lot closer to Canadian neighbors than to most American neighbors. So you might have to be nice to Canadians. Put them first? I don't know.
A valid point, though, here, is this issue of the ethics of proximity. So
yes,
we are called to love our neighbors and love all, but I do have there is an appropriate biblical Christian ethic that says I ought to care for my own wife and children more than I care for your wife and children, Phil. Right?
Thanks.
And like that's just an ethics of proximity. So then the question is, how far does that go?
Right.
And what does it mean for a country, for a community?
Do we really mean proximity if I'm talking about, because I say I live in Detroit and there's a problem going on in Windsor, Canada, right?
No, we're talking about relational proximity.
Relational proximity.
Right. Okay. So my brother's in California. He's farther away from me than, I don't know, your son, Jeremy. I like Jeremy. I would care for Jeremy. I would help Jeremy if I could, but I have an obligation to my brother in California, which is greater than my obligation to your son, Jeremy.
Okay. So that's familial, though. That's familial.
It's relational proximity.
Okay.
So I have a question. If a pastor did say, I want to inspire you to love your country.
Yeah.
What does that actually even mean?
Yeah, that's the question is, what are you asking me to do? Because quite often especially since the 1960s, it's America, love it or leave it. And it was generated by the civil rights movement and it was generated by the anti-war movement. Like, hey, if you don't like it here, you just leave. So love it or leave it. And that's where I go when I hear people calling me to love my country is to reject dissent.
Right. It means to stop criticizing the myth of America that I find comforting.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean don't be thankful for the blessings of where you live. Doesn't mean that at all. So I think I needed to separate out what's gratitude for my country versus love of country, which often turns into nationalism and patriotism and blind allegiance to, like the Texan dad at the school board meeting who just said, all I want my kids to learn in history is that the worst day in America is better than the best day anywhere else on earth, which is just ludicrous.
I
But
think
that's all he wanted his kids to learn.
One of the separating factors here is, do you define the country as a thing or as a people? So
right.
Do I love America, the country, or do I love America, the people? And if it's the people, that includes a lot of people that I disagree with, a lot of people who don't share my values and convictions, a lot of people who are fundamentally opposed to what I think and believe, but I'm still called to love them. But if America is an idea, if America is a thing, then I get to pick that narrative, that myth of America that I'm going to be loyal to, which can exclude a huge number of actual Americans.
I think at one point I pointed out that probably half the people that are most insistent that we need to love America also want their states to secede.
Or the polling is showing more and more of them feel like it's justifiable to commit violence against Americans and the government in the name of loving America.
Right. So, I mean, that just goes to show you it's not really loving your country that's the issue.
It's loving an ideology.
Right. The myth of your country.
Yeah. I did point out that German pastors played a pretty big role in getting Germans to support the German state during World War II. And that was patriotism and nationalism preached from the pulpit, which is why many people would be uncomfortable with patriotism and nationalism being exhorted from the pulpit.
But weren't some people responding to that saying, yeah, of course, but anything can be made into an idol or anything can be abused?
Yeah. So just love your neighbors. Love your neighbors. Then because love your neighbors has the guardrails that will prevent you from hurting your neighbors. Love your country does not have the guardrails to prevent you from hurting your neighbors.
Right. There's a difference. I mean, when Jesus says love your neighbor as yourself, or the Old Testament law says love your neighbor as yourself, there's no equivalent self when you say love your country.
As yourself.
Right? It doesn't kind of work that way.
Yeah. Jason, what do you think? Bring us the millennial view.
Disillusionment, I think, that this conversation was even had and got as far as it did.
It just kept going.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm so similar to you in that I just think that we should love our neighbors. Like that's what that's the fulfillment of love, right? Is just loving your neighbor. And so I don't understand how people get so caught up in all this other stuff that just distracts.
Yeah.
I just don't get it.
And someone compared it to, which was kind of interesting. They compared it to, Tim Keller's call to love your city. Let's love New York City. That's so if we can do that, then why not let's love America? And I just think it's two different things, especially when you're talking to Christians who have often demonized big cities and urban environments and fled them. We were the white flight. We were the ones. There aren't very many white churches in Chicago anymore because so many of us moved to the suburbs, took our churches with us, and abandoned the cities. So when Tim Keller says, love your city, I receive that very differently than Robert Jeffress pulling out Donald Trump on Christmas Sunday and saying, we love America. It's a whole different baggage.
For sure.
Context again. Context matters.
Context, my man. Context. All right. I had one more story, which I'll save for next time. So we'll talk about that next time. What? Anybody? Oh, Christian, you weren't here last week. It was just Sky and I. What do you hope for 2022? Do you have any aspirations for this coming year, for the church, for what we're doing with our ministry?
Our ministry at the Holy Post?
Yeah.
I am loving what's happening with the Holy Post. I love that you guys are, talking to as many people as you are and adding some new things for all of our listeners. I think our listeners are loving that. And I just hope we can do more of that and that more people will continue to participate in this greater conversation that we have. And I really do hope for things to really turn around this year in our little evangelical Christian community. I'm hopeful that better things are on the horizon.
Are you more concerned about the church or about America?
Oh, more concerned about the church or America? Oh,
What's the difference?
That's a tough question.
Sky. Sorry. Funny.
I think they're both equally in peril, but ultimately, I have a lot more faith in the church than in what's happening in democracy right now. I'm a little bit more concerned.
Okay, we're heading into, we got a midterm this year. It's a midterm this year. You excited about that?
No,
you excited
not
for the
at all.
advertising to start? Yeah. Okay. Hey, y'all, thanks for supporting us on Patreon. We really appreciate it. We're looking forward to a new year with a lot of fun new interviews and fun new news, some of it related to the back end of creatures. So we'll keep digging up the fun stories. And we have a great interview today for you, I assume. Sky, that wasn't a very nice face you just made at me. And we will see you next week. Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Today's episode is being sponsored by Faithful Counseling. As a Christian, you know God is always there for you, but sometimes things in life can feel downright overwhelming, especially in this season of the holidays where we're dealing with family and perhaps grief over past losses, and that's when it's really beneficial to speak with someone who shares your faith and values. Online counseling from Faithful Counseling is here for you. You can connect with a professional Christian counselor in a safe, private online environment at your own time and at your own pace. You can schedule your secure video or phone sessions, plus chat and text with your therapist. Everything you share is confidential, and because finding the right fit can sometimes be a little challenging, if you're not happy with your counselor for any reason, you can request a new one at any time at no additional charge. They have 3,000 U.S. licensed therapists with specializations in areas like family conflict, sleeping disorders, trauma, anger, stress, and relationships. And best of all, it's affordable. Financial aid is available for those who qualify, and as a Holy Post listener, you can get an additional 10% off your first month, so why not get started today? Go to faithfulcounseling.com/holypost, where you can fill out a questionnaire so you can get matched with a counselor you'll love. That's faithfulcounseling.com/holypost.
The Holy Post podcast is funded by listeners like you who support us on Patreon. And this episode is also supported by Abide, the #1 Christian meditation app. This is Phil. Do you ever have trouble falling asleep at night? Do you ever wrestle with anxiety? No? Liar. We all do. Meditation apps are all the rage. But what the heck are you meditating on? Fill your mind with the Bible with the Abide meditation app. Abide's meditations start at just 2 minutes long. That's easy. You can do that. Get started now with 25% off a premium subscription by downloading the Abide app at abide.co/holypost. You'll get additional stories and meditations, premium music, soothing sounds, and more. Support the Holy Post podcast and get 25% off by going to abide.co/holypost. That's abide.co/holypost to download the Abide app and get 25% off your premium subscription. And now, back to the show.
I've known about Christine Caine for some time, but I was finally at an event this fall where I got to meet her. We ended up having a conversation about her experience as a Pentecostal Christian from Australia who's been transplanted into American evangelicalism. I found the conversation so interesting that I thought, I've got to have her on the podcast and continue it. So that's what we did. Christine Caine has been an evangelist for decades, and she's spoken around the world. She is also the founder of A21, an organization that is ending human trafficking in countries throughout the world. You can learn more about it at a21.org. This conversation with Christine is kind of different than what we normally do because she didn't come on to promote a particular book or even her ministry. She came on just to continue this conversation with me about the nature of American evangelicalism, Pentecostalism, and just the global church and what it can contribute to the way we think about our faith. I found the conversation really helpful and interesting. I hope you do too. One technical note, we had some glitches at the beginning of the recording, so we lost the very start of the conversation, but we jump in where Christine is talking about her experience in the Pentecostal church in Australia. I think you'll be able to follow along from there. Here's my conversation with Christine Caine. I've been around long enough to realize that there's no perfect church structure, and there's no perfect theological system, and there's no one stream of the church that's like, oh, they finally figured it out. So as you journeyed longer and longer in that kind of Pentecostal environment, when did you begin to notice that, wait a minute, maybe there's some things here that aren't romantic and ideal all the time?
For sure. And I mean, I wouldn't have just done all those years at Wheaton if I thought that was the only way. So it was... And it was certainly the road that the Lord had for me, because then through my 20s, there were lots of opportunities to serve in church again, because, there it was. So, and of course, thank God I was from a tradition that certainly saw if you had a gift, we want you to exercise that gift, because it was about advancing the kingdom. It was about flourishing and fulfilling your purpose. And the gifts of the Spirit, in the same way that the fruit of the Spirit are non-gendered, we believe that the gifts of the Spirit are non-gendered. And so there was never an issue about if there was a gift on your life, there were opportunities to use it. I think it was also helpful that I got saved, and all my early discipleship was in Australia, where so few people go to church. There was no Christian, especially in the late 80s, 90s when I was there. There was no Christian subculture. There was no. I mean, if you got saved, you really got saved, because there was no benefit to being saved. There was no such thing as a Christian career. Nobody was thinking, I'm going to make a career out of this. You had also, when it came to the gifts of the Spirit, you just had to operate in them because you had nothing else going for you. I mean, you just needed to in order to survive. It was just part of the package. You got saved, and this all happened because there was no subculture to fit into. And particularly, I was, the church that I was a part of was just growing. When I first went, it was a few hundred people in the back of a warehouse. I mean, over the next 30 years, it became extremely influential in the Western world in particular, really all over the world. And I saw that growth. So I have seen the Lord take a bunch of ragamuffins, a bunch of, for want of a better word, spiritual mongrels from the back of nowhere, and do incredible things. But I've also seen that, you said it really well, that there's no perfect system, because there is no perfect, and there is no perfect church. I always smile to myself when people want to go back. Let's go back to the church in Acts. I'm going, which one in particular? Which one of the early churches? Let's begin with what problems. Do we want to go back to Corinth? Do we want to go back to Ephesus? Would you like to go back to Galatia? Where exactly do you want to go? So I that's why I'm always very positive, and I haven't lost heart, even with what we're seeing across every stream of the church, in the charismatic world, the Pentecostal world, the evangelical world, the unveiling, the true apocalypse now, in the true sense of the word, the unveiling that is happening. It's sobering, but I'm not disheartened, because it's not the first or the last time in church history that something like this has happened, and the Lord's doing a course correction and an auto correction, and there's not one stream that hasn't been impacted. I think in the Pentecostal world, the weariness of structure I'm not saying the motives are always pure, but there is a pure motive in it. The fear of we will lose the authenticity of the move of the Spirit. We will somehow contain that, put a lid on it. We don't want to put a box around it, because we all know that God moved outside of the box. There was all sort of the established institutional church. We were part of the fringe, the margins, and we saw, you cannot deny it. No matter how many degrees I get, I cannot deny what I have seen, and it doesn't make sense. There's no seminary course that I can put that in a nice box and tie a bow on it and say, wow, I can explain what happened, because I can't. It was supernatural. It really was at what I saw the Lord do. But then I've also seen that go awry. I've seen what happens when you sow fear limiting the work of the Holy Spirit, that you then don't even do what Paul tells us to do in the book of Corinthians, which is you don't get out of control and just allow things to have. I mean, there was order and there was control, even when the gifts of the Spirit. So there are some streams of the charismatic church that I have a cringe factor, and I'm like, this is not biblical. In that, it's what's going on here is out of control. There is not order, and someone needs to come in and bring correction here, and the order needs to be put in place. Then in other streams of the church, the abuse of the gifts, in the sense that the gifts are used either to entertain the church or to manipulate and exploit people, rather than for the purpose for which they are given, which at all times is to bring hope and life and help flourishing. And but I've seen them manipulated, and I've seen them shatter people, in many ways. And it's so there's that side. Then there's a whole other side, but this is not exclusive to just the Pentecostal church. I think maybe to the whole contemporary church movement, maybe the whole church growth movement, which of course is not just the Pentecostal, it's the whole stream. Then there's the desire to so connect with culture that you no longer discern how much of the culture have we just absorbed? How much of the culture have we just become? How much of the marketing tools have we just used, and where we no longer can discern where is the Holy Spirit and where is just human marketing? Where have we just bought into the celebrity culture that we just think that bigger and better, that everything's always got to be moving up and to the right, and the more we're affirmed by culture, somehow we've taken that as, well, that must mean God is on our side, that must mean we are doing awesome. And then the checks and balances, which actually come down to character and accountability, and exhibiting the fruit of the Spirit as much as the gift of the Spirit, we throw that out the door in the name of, well, we're advancing the kingdom because look how many young people are coming, or look how much culture really accepts us, and not checking. I've seen that blow up. I mean, we all actually have,
Right.
So that's the bottom line.
So one of the areas that, if you were to draw a Venn diagram of the Pentecostal tradition and the more, established evangelical tradition, I feel like one of the areas where they definitely overlap is that both of these traditions of the church tend to emphasize churches built around the personalities and dynamism of gifted leaders.
Yes.
And it's one of the things that I'm hearing from more and more people. Maybe this is a post-pandemic kind of thing, or amidst the pandemic, like people are getting tired of churches imploding because of the frailty of charismatic, and I mean that little c, charismatic leaders. And they're wondering, is there a way to be a community where the argument I've made is that even very low church evangelicals have a highly sacramental theology. And in Anglican churches or Roman Catholic churches, they believe that you encounter the presence of God through the elements of communion, right? That somehow in a mysterious way, God's present in those elements. And in a lot of the churches I've been a part of, we don't do communion very often, but what we believe, we don't say this, but I think what our practice shows is we believe the primary place that you encounter the presence of God is through the personality of the preacher. And the problem with that is, the bread and the cup have never run off with the church secretary, right? They've never betrayed me. They've never lied to me. They've never had a profound character flaw. Yet in so many charismatic Pentecostal and evangelical churches that are built on the dynamism of a preacher or leader, it seems inherently fragile because we are broken people. Is there any way around that other than a structure that doesn't put a leader teacher at the center of everything?
I think that's the question that's before us. Now, I come from a Greek Orthodox background, and, I work with the breadth of the church worldwide. There are as many issues in the liturgical church as there are in our kind of churches. So,
the Roman Catholic sex abuse scandals of recent. I mean, they're like I said, there is no perfect system.
No, and in the world that I came out of, it was as much as, yes, we talk about the centrality of the sacraments. It's still built around the priest as well in that way. So I think a lot of the language I hear in talking with so many young people now it's almost like, well, let's go back to somehow we're always looking for some answer, because here is the deal. And whatever you might believe about transubstantiation and the elements, the fact is that God has placed his Holy Spirit in people. So we can't get around the people piece, no matter what. So that's why I'm not the person to have the conversation about sacraments and all of that. I'm into it all, but I'm just saying I'm not going back to find the answer in that way, because that system is any system is inherently flawed. My question is, are we willing to wrestle enough to go, if God put his Spirit in flawed people, and that same Spirit sends all of us into the world to fulfill, going to all the world and make disciples and baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, like fulfilling the Great Commission. And I'm a Great Commission girl, and I'm an evangelism girl. So I'm always going to come back to this place and go, how does that work out? Now, in my early days, in my Pentecostal church, it wasn't as much. Certainly there was a central leader. That's not the issue. But in terms of the pulpit being shared, like, you never knew who was going to preach. And still to this day, to be honest, in that particular church, you don't know. No, it's never announced this person's preaching or that person's preaching. So you turned up, and whoever was bringing the word, you trusted that you were going to hear the Spirit of the Lord through the word that was delivered. Everybody was encouraged to exercise their gifts. Down the track, and maybe I don't know how you can ensure that is pure when it's gone from one generation to the next, because whoever starts even now and they say, okay, let's either have micro churches or let's start, all the conversations that are happening now and I'm very much in the emergent church world, so I'm talking to people, and I'm having these conversations in Sweden, I'm having them in South Africa and Indonesia and South America, as much as I'm having them here in North America. And you almost want to put it all up on a screen and go, guys, the very thing you're walking away from, this other group on the other side of the world is saying, this is the answer. And those of us that are going, I'm walking away from this and the centrality of the preacher, well, on the other side of the world, they're going, that's the answer. And I'm going, if we could all actually come around the table and be honest enough to say, okay, this is what worked really well, and this is where I think, in my experience, my observation, it went wrong. This is what we didn't protect. And I've certainly got my own thoughts about, in my world, going, okay, I've been around for 35 years, and I can say it was flawed because we're humanly flawed, but for 20 years, it was as good as anything else, that's in this flawed world. But I could probably sit down and have a cup of coffee with you and go, I think I started to see some things go awry at this point. And I think when we actually didn't preserve this value, and we were willing to compromise on that value for the sake of either reaching more people, the intention was good, but the minute now, I wouldn't be general with that. I'm not going to do a post about that because it would change from situation to situation. But I think when at some point you're willing, without a lot of thought and prayer, to change some core values that helped you get there, changing methods, I don't think we should be that, I'm not that precious about methods. I think methods can change all the time. But I think some values that we have in place, and when you don't have enough checks and balances because you're used to moving fast, now from the Pentecostal world, you go, you're used to following the Holy Spirit. So I'm going here, I'm going here. Now, if there are not some good checks and balances, and there need to be, of that, as a 55-year-old woman that has seen God do amazing things in the last 35 years and seen some amazing things blow up in the last few years, that is devastating and has caused a lot of pain and has caused a lot of confusion. And it devastates me as much as anybody else. I think that if we have some checks and balances, but what could be considered a check and balance in one sense, I don't think it's the silver bullet in another situation. And so I listen to so many podcasts, and I listen to so many conversations. And as people come out of the woundedness of their own world, they think this is what we're going to do. And what may be a form of an expression of narcissism in one particular tradition, may or may not be exactly the same thing in another tradition. So saying this is the answer and this is the check and balance in all situations, in all places, in all cultures, at all times, I think can stop the movement of the church going forward as much as having no checks and balances and saying nothing matters. And those of us that are willing to wrestle in the middle, hopefully will be able to find a way forward for the next generation as the church goes forward. But I think just saying, okay, the answer is to go back to liturgical church, or the answer is to go back to this. Listen, we're going to be in the same mess 5 years from now.
So as I hear you, two things stand out. Tell me if this is a fair, not summary, but this is what I'm getting from you.
Okay.
Number one, your point was really good. There's no way getting around people, right? No matter what system you're a part of, at the end of the day, there are people there. And part of me celebrates that. I firmly believe the greatest gift that God has given the world are his spirit-filled people. Absolutely. And they're going to organize themselves into different structures or whatever. But so that's number one. Let's not take out that flawed reality of people. But secondly, it sounds to me like what you're calling us to is whatever tradition you're a part of, we need leaders or people in general to maintain a healthy dose of skepticism about their own tradition or their own structure. I think what scares me, and I've always been skeptical. I think I came out of the womb skeptical. But what scares me are people who truly have drunk the Kool-Aid and don't believe that they or their community are susceptible to the same problems as another one. And therefore they're too trusting of their leaders. They're too trusting of their structures. They're too committed to them, and they don't ever question what's going on. And then a decade goes by and everything implodes and you're like, what happened? I can't believe it. And I've just encountered so many people over my 25 years in this racket that have drunk the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
And I'm experiencing it right now with a church that is imploding because I think too many leaders weren't skeptical enough. So there needs to be that healthy dose of uncertainty and skepticism that both makes us dependent on God and his spirit and a little slightly distrusting of the people around us, not in an ungodly way or an unhealthy way, but just in a wise way, and of ourselves, I guess.
And of ourselves, I think that's a big thing too. So it's not like just, it's not only when a leader sort of has drunk the Kool-Aid about their own system, but if you drunk the Kool-Aid about yourself, then right. That's the problem that,
totally.
Called. But my thought there is that, I think even Paul, in the scripture, we're told to have a right assessment. Don't think too highly, don't think too lowly. So I don't think it's even a skepticism. I mean, or that's probably good language because we're looking for words to use, but I think it's having that right view. I don't know how any of us this side of eternity can think that we've got the one system. That's why we need each other. I know when we were in Vermont, we were just talking I think just at the end we all prayed together, but I think I used the analogy of oftentimes we are one piece of the wineskin, just one square, except we all think either our tradition or whatever we've come from, our denomination, we think that's the whole new wineskin. This is it. And especially if you're into sort of church planting, church growth, whatever it might be, you're like, we have the new thing and this is the new wineskin. And the heart's pure more often than not. I really am convinced God's going to pour new wine into new wineskin. This is going to be awesome. But I'm like, the more we all recognize, oh no, I've just got a square, and somehow the degree to which we are willing to allow ourselves to be stitched into the greater body as part of God's wineskin. But often we're not willing to do that because that's when you rub up against each other. That's very painful. A stitching process is painful. I think perhaps what has kept me, often people will say, whether it's in the charismatic side, Pentecostal side, or the evangelical side, Chris, you sort of seem to have a sober assessment of all of it, and you're in it all. And I've been involved in lots of visible and non-visible places, behind the scenes, and very obviously, very visibly in other places. But I think what has given me that healthy, I'll use your language, skepticism, but I just think it's a right assessment, is the fact that I'm in and out of so many different streams. And so it is very impossible to be with brothers and sisters in other streams and go, God is very obviously here. And these people, in many ways, some of my evangelical friends are so much more godly than me. I mean, I need to be around them to be sharpened, and they've really helped me in many ways. And I know my fire and zeal, they'd be the first to say, oh man, Chris, we need that. Like, please, we need like a good dose of your fire. I don't want them to leave their stream. And I shouldn't leave mine, but together we've got to be in proximity, because coming out, and that, I think maybe that is what helped me from blowing up when everything else blew up, because I had enough distance, because I was around so many other worlds that I'd come back into my world to go, whoa, this is not healthy. So you don't know when you're in it, you're not aware of the things that are going, maybe just like, I just always use the example, if an aeroplane leaves Sydney, Australia to come here to LA, the pilot just needs to set that navigation system 1 degree off course. That's all it takes. And, 14 hours later, that pilot's going to land in China, not in LA. Well, when you're within a system and an organization and a structure, and you're moving so forward, and it seems like God's blessing, and you're not really paying attention to the gauge that's got the red alert, mostly because you haven't been taught to pay attention to that gauge. 9 times out of 10, I really don't believe it's out of a wrong intent. There is, of course, always the ultimate narcissist that is, of course, but by and large, most people are just looking at the gauges that you think God's blessing, and when the Lord's actually flashing the red gauge to go, the light's flashing for a reason here. But if you haven't been in any other circles, you don't even know what that red light flashing means. I think maybe I've been given a bit of a perspective of the red light flashing because I've been in and out of so many different worlds. So then you'd be out of yours for a little while. Maybe, I was doing a whole bunch of things with the evangelical church here. Then I step back into my world, and then I'm like, oh, wow, there's a red light flashing and no one's seeing it. Then, of course, you begin to second guess yourself. You're like, is there something wrong with me? And then I'm always asking myself, like, have I become what they always said? You're going to go to school, and then it's not seminary, it's cemetery, and you're going to be dead, and you're all the things, all the stereotypical things, and so you're second guessing yourself, and you're wondering, and I think we all have that. So the more we are willing to be together, and I'm not talking about be together, hold hands, sing kumbaya, and pretend everything's okay when all our red lights are flashing and this thing's going to go down. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying, but if we're willing to do even what you and I are doing right now and go, okay, maybe let's just step one step closer, try to understand, then actually, Sky, you can help me see where the red light's flashing in my life, hopefully before I go down with a plane. That's what I'm hoping we're able to do.
I could not concur more. I have been in meetings with and then developed relationships with Christian sisters and brothers in traditions very, very different than mine, with whom I have profound theological disagreements. And yet, as I spent time with them, I come to the conclusion, this person knows Jesus.
Yeah.
Right? This person knows Jesus. I wouldn't ordain them in my church. I probably, there's significant differences and whatever, but maybe I haven't got it all figured out either.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason why, I've definitely benefited from the years when I was, say, at Christianity Today, and I got to travel and engage, across different denominational and historical traditions. But I think it's part of the reason I'm a Christian to begin with, because I came from such a diverse family and upbringing, and I traveled so broadly as a kid, and I saw so many different things. I think that's where I jokingly call it skepticism, but that's where it comes from, where I didn't exist in a monolithic, homogeneous environment where I could just casually absorb and accept whatever it was that I was in, because even my parents didn't agree on most things. They were totally different backgrounds and traditions and belief systems and all that. So I was constantly figuring out, how do I navigate between these things? And it made me appreciate what was valuable in the different things, but constantly question. Totally. And even now as a Christian, as I move between different circles of the church and different traditions, as you do even more than I do now, like there's just something, I'm not threatened by it. It doesn't bother me. And if anything, when I can't do that in actual relationship, I try to do it in my reading, in my exposure. But man, a lot of the Christians I meet, they don't have any sense of the world outside of their homogenous little tradition, forget over time or culture or ethnicities or they don't know any of that. And then you wonder why so many of them deconstruct the whole kit and caboodle.
Oh, well, totally, because it's so much. I remember when I think in 1998 was my first trip to America to minister in a church. I had never seen a flag in a church in all my, never in my life, unless in some real missions-oriented churches, I saw every flag. So, there was some in our denomination, it would be the only time I'd ever seen it was, of course, everyone, depending on whether at that time there was 208 countries or 228 countries, whatever it was,
right.
According, so never did it occur to me that any church in all of my travels, it's just the world that I was in, would have a flag of their nation.
That's because none of the other churches you went to were chosen by God for their nation. That's why.
But I just remember when I first saw that, just how shocking, trying to understand, okay, that's unique. Or a place where I just never saw women anywhere. I thought, okay, that is also unique. But not only where I didn't see women, but women that I met, brilliant women, say doing amazing things, suddenly shrink whenever it was talking. I didn't even realize there was a theology that so caused women to shrink and consider themselves secondary, less than, all of those things. It was very shocking to me. I remember in those early years trying to understand, not even talking about whether a woman could preach or not. That's I'm not even bringing that into the equation, but just seeing what that was like. I remember the first time I watched, you might laugh, but I knew nothing really about American baseball or anything. So when I first came here and someone said, oh, we're playing the World Series. And I remember going, okay. So I sat down ready to watch the World Series. Now, you got to understand, I'm Australian. I'm Greek, actually, Greek Australian. So you're thinking World Cup soccer. That's what you think is sport, World Cup. And Sky, I was waiting for the world. I'm like, where is the world? Because I'm watching World Series. And then I remember watching the world news. I burst out laughing because it kind of started in, I don't know, at New York, went down to Miami, across to LA and up to Seattle. And I'm like, okay, I'm waiting for the world news because we just had the world news. And as an Aussie, at that point, I'd not been to America. I'd been to I think at that point, I'd been to 79 other countries. It was the weirdest feeling to be here and go, okay, I've just watched the World Series, but a couple of hundred countries really obviously decided not to participate. And we are going to go into all the world, but apparently there's only one flag, okay? And now I'm watching the world news that stops on this continent. That sent me, I'm laughing because, here I am finishing my Wheaton. It really did send me to go, I need to learn a little bit more about this situation because it's quite unique to a lot of the Pentecostal world around the world, whether I've been in Brazil or whether I've been in Indonesia or in Qatar or, over in Europe or the rest of Southeast Asia, or, I've got 16 countries where I have offices of A21. It was unique. And again, for me, I guess that's why I can't get so caught up in what seems, and perhaps maybe in some little small streams of social media, to be the biggest thing in the world, because it actually isn't the biggest thing in the church world. As in when we're really talking about the church and the world. I could happily be ministering all around the church world and have nothing to do with that little slither of the church, which would be North American, evangelicalism. And I wouldn't even realize it. There's we're reaching millions of people because there are plenty of people out there finding Jesus, being discipled, growing in their faith. And you can think what is happening right now in America is the only thing that is happening. And
absolutely.
I'm just here to say it's not.
Right. Yeah, I remember maybe it was I don't know what year, 2014, I think I was in South Africa doing some stuff, and there was a hot debate. I don't know who exactly it was, but there's this massive debate going back on in the evangelical church in America around social justice and evangelism.
Right.
And I was writing a lot on it. I was still at Christianity Today at the time, doing speaking on that, different conferences and issues around the United States. And I was in South Africa doing something totally unrelated. And I was talking to some folks there about it. And they were looking at me like, what? What? Wait, you mean that there are Christians in America who are arguing about whether it's more important to preach the gospel or to care for people?
Yes.
And they're looking at me like, seriously? That's what you guys are fighting about in America? Like, no one else is arguing about that. No one cares. Like, this is not a debate in the rest of the global church, right? And I, again, I had traveled a lot. I knew that, but sometimes I just hadn't been out of the United States enough in the midst of that argument to put it in some perspective. And I know that there are other things that the global church and various areas should care more about. Maybe we do here, but your point is a good one. We need to be cosmopolitan in our approach to things. And especially those of us with leadership responsibilities need to take the blinders off and ideally travel to some of these places, even better, develop real relationships with people from these other traditions and places. And if we can't do either of those things, at least be exposed to it, right? Watch the videos, read the books, find out what people in other parts of the world and different traditions think about things. Even if it doesn't change our mind, at least it'll humble us a little bit.
Totally. And I don't know that the whole goal is always that all our minds are changed about everything, but exposure,
right?
I think helps us be better humans and better Christians, which I often laugh. I think, man, I think sometimes we Christians need to learn to be better human beings, to live in this world, because God created us as humans. And I think so much of what consumes so much of our time and energy in light of eternity isn't going to matter. And some of those hills that we're dying on, I'm like, really? That's the hill? We all should have hills. Listen, I laugh because that's where I probably am very evangelical. I laugh, at people. I go, in some ways, I think I'm more reformed than some people really might be. So there are some hills I'm going to die on. There are probably other hills that people wish I would die on. So you go, okay, at the end of the day, I'm going to stand before the Lord and give an account for my own life, as you are, as we all are. And I'm going to have to do that. Now, while I'm here on the big things that we can all be in agreement on, if we can move forward and help the church move forward, then I like what you said. You go, well, I probably wouldn't ordain that person in my church. Well, that's great. And so, that's how it should be. And I hope everyone has their thing, but they're like secondary issues, not the major issues. And if we could go, look, as the church, what is our witness like in this world? And how are we going at fulfilling, the commission that the Lord has given us? I mean, apparently it was so important that before he ascended into heaven, he sort of, came here and detoured via earth and said, oops, I've got something I need you to do that's really, really important. And before I go up to the Father, let me just give you your marching orders. We are sort of so not consumed about that because we're arguing about everything else that I'm going, we don't all have to try to make each other agree on all of the other things. In fact, some of that flavor and color and diversity and nuance is beautiful. But there are enough big things that we actually all really do agree on. So could we come together on those, bring our little patch and help the new wineskin actually be formed, so that the kingdom can continue to, advance here on earth. And so I guess that's kind of where I am with all of this.
Yeah, your call to pick the hills you want to die on is important because we can't die on all of them. My problem is I feel like people are trying to kill me on their hills.
Yes.
Right? And I'm sorry. I refuse to let you kill me on your hill. I choose not to die here. This is not the one I'm going to die for. But everyone wants to kill me on their hill. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. And there's too many these days. There's just too many hills.
Totally. And don't you think that's the Lord? I think that's part of the fight of faith. I think people tried to get Jesus to die on their hill all the way through, like obviously. And I think that fight in this hour where we feel, and especially when you love people, you love the church, you want to reach the world. I think all of us, you struggle going, okay, am I just being, should I be more attentive to this? Should I be saying something about this? Should I be doing something in this area? I think the fight of faith is to go, okay, Lord, in my lane, what have you called me to do? And staying true to that is part of this fight where there are so many distractions. People are pulling you in all directions, and staying true to what God's called you to do. That to me is my personal greatest struggle every day, because I love people and I care about things, but because I care about things doesn't mean I have to get involved and say things about everything because I care about some things. Because if you end up saying lots of things about everything, nobody's really going to listen to you about the one thing that you should be, the hill that you should be dying on.
Right, which means I'm in huge trouble because every week I get on this podcast and talk about all kinds of random things. But anyway, Christine, thank you for sharing more of your story and perspective. Want to have you back on for sure to talk about more stuff.
The Holy Post podcast is a production of Phil Vischer Enterprises, that's Phil's company, and Sky Pilot Media, that's Sky's company. Production assistance by Julie Betcher. Editing by Jason Rugg. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by supporting us at patreon.com/holypost. Also, be sure to leave a review on iTunes so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary plus ukulele and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, and more.